and welcome back. A little while ago, Moog introduced Mavis, a brand new compact semi-modular synth with a few clever tricks up its sleeve. And it's very suitable for people interested in patching or a gateway into modular synthesis. In this video, I'm going to assume some basic synth knowledge and not do a classic review, as there are some good ones out there already. Instead, I'll take my own approach and break down the architecture of Mavis in a detailed flowchart to show how modular it is. Then I'll use that flowchart for a series of patch ideas, and finally I'll show you how you can expand on the features of Mavis in a compact modular setup. This isn't a sponsored video, all thoughts are my own, and if you do want to support my video series or you want to get access to the PDF sheets of the illustrations I use in this and many of my other videos, have a look at my Patreon. But now, let's dive right in. Mavis is fairly intuitive to use, but knowing exactly which components are present and how modular they are can help you understand its patching possibilities. Mavis has a clear layout. The patch bay can be found on the left, and on the right you have manual control over all the components, with clear labeling. I'll go over all of these, point out some details, and build up the flowchart of the architecture along the way, here on the top. The core of Mavis is a simple classic setup with a single oscillator, filter, and VCA. Here, on the top row of the module, you'll find manual control for these components. Oscillator pitch, wave shape, variable from ramp to square, and manual pulse width control. The classic 24 dB low-pass ladder filter offers cutoff and resonance, and the VCA offers just a simple master output control. Looking at the flowchart, I've visualized all the in and outputs available on the patch bay. The oscillator has its own output, as well as a 1 volt per octave input and a CV input for the pulse width control. The filter offers a CV input for the cutoff, and there's a CV input for the VCA as well. The output of the VCA is generally used as the main output of the module. Note that the filter and VCA don't have their own audio inputs, so you can't use these as independent units. But I'll come back to this as Mavis holds a lovely secret. To finish these sections, there's a normal internal connection from the oscillator to the filter, and a hard connection from the filter to the VCA. So without any patch cables, you have a working synth voice. As for modulation, Mavis offers an LFO and an envelope generator. Again, you'll find manual controls over these components in one horizontal row of knobs. The LFO rate, which goes well into audio rates and tracks 1 volt per octave, and wave shape, this time variable from triangle to square. And I was also pleasantly surprised to see control over a full ADSR envelope. Looking at the flowchart, on the patch bay you'll find separate outputs for the LFO and envelope generator, as well as CV control over the LFO rate and the gate input to control the envelope. The internal connections here are very powerful. The LFO is connected to the filter, as well as the oscillator, able to modulate pitch and pulse width. And the envelope is connected to the VCA, filter, and again, the oscillator's pitch and pulse width. To control this modulation power, you can use the middle row of controls. Both the oscillator and filter have a control to set the modulation balance between the LFO and envelope. Then you can apply the set balance in a certain amount to the oscillator's pitch and pulse width, as well as the filter cutoff. Please note that I drew the internal connections in gray, and they are not connected to any of the in and outputs. These connections are always there and can't be broken. This is nice because it makes complex modulation very easy. If you patch in another source, for example to modulate the cutoff of the filter, that is simply added to the internal modulation, so you can use it next to the LFO and envelope. Finishing off the core ingredients, here on the bottom of Mavis you'll find a small keyboard. Of course, it's internally connected to the pitch of the oscillator and to the gate of the envelope. But there's also a keyboard CV output on the patch bay, which again doesn't break any internal connections when you use it. Beside these basic ingredients, Mavis offers a selection of utilities that expand the creative possibilities a lot. One of them isn't really a utility though, and rather integrated in the synth's architecture. And that is the fold section. It only has a single control right here. And if you look at the chart, you can see there's an audio input for the folder on the patch bay, but there's no output. That is because the output of the folder is hardwired to the input of the filter. This would interfere with the normal connection from the oscillator. So the way this works is simple. If you don't use the folder input, the oscillator is going to the filter, like you see here. But as soon as you patch something into the input of the folder, the connection from the oscillator to the filter is broken. To integrate the folder in your basic setup, simply patch the oscillator's output directly into the folder. This folder section adds a lot of possibilities to the known Moog sound palette. I do have to say I wish there was a CV input to modulate it, but it's still very powerful, and I'll use it a lot in upcoming patches. Let's get back to the flowchart by adding other available utility sections. There's a mixer with 2 inputs and 2 outputs. One output is the sum of both input signals. The other is just connected to the first input. On Mavis, you will only find a single control for the first input, so you can use it as an attenuator for a single signal or mix it with a second signal at unity gain. There's also a separate attenuator with a single input and output to control the amount of a signal passing through it, and a multiple to multiply a single input to 2 outputs. Finally, there's a sample and hold circuit with full control on the patch bay. There's an input normal to the oscillator and the gate input normaled to the LFO. These normalizations are broken when you patch something else in. Of course, there's also a sample and hold output. This circuit isn't going anywhere internally, so you need patching to make use of it. And that's it. That's the whole flowchart. This architecture offers a lot of patching possibilities and integration with other modular or semi-modular gear. So let's make some patches. I took the effort of taking you through the whole flowchart for good reason. If you look at the synth's architecture like this, with all the inputs, outputs and internal connections, you can easily see what modulation options are available. You can literally have a look at any of the available outputs and see which components with inputs can be modulated. For example, if you look at the oscillator, there's an internal connection to the sample and hold, and of course into the filter. But without breaking any of those connections, you can take the oscillator's output, send it through the attenuator, so you can control the amount of signal passing on, for example, to modulate the filter cutoff. Especially with some resonance, this adds some wet vowel-like texture, and you can still use the LFO at slower rates to modulate the filter using the internal modulation. A fun trick with Mavis is to flip the function of the oscillator and LFO. This makes sense because they offer different shapes. You can patch the LFO to the fold input. This breaks the connection from the oscillator, and the fold sounds great with the LFO's triangle wave. Then use the VCO through an attenuator to modulate the cutoff again. The oscillator frequency doesn't go as low as the LFO, but can still be used to add texture like we did before, or use the saw wave to create modulation that sounds a bit like delay. In quite some of the demos, I also use a simple sequencer to create melodies. In this case, I send the sequencer's gate output to the gate input of the envelope, and the 1 volt per octave output of the sequencer to the oscillator. Here's another simple example, catching 3 very common modulation routings that are not normal in Mavis. You can send the keyboard CV to the filter. This opens the filter and creates brighter tones if you go higher up the scale. You can send the LFO through an attenuator to the VCA to add tremolo. And, a connection I like, the envelope through the mixer to modulate the LFO rate. In this case, only channel 1 of the mixer is used to get the function of an attenuator. If you have been watching my channel, you know I like to run 2 oscillators with different tunings through a wave folder. And on Mavis, that's possible. For clarity, I'm going to hide the sample and hold circuit for now. I'll come back to it later. Now, we have to do some patching. First off, send the keyboard out to the LFO rate. This way, both the oscillator and LFO track 1 volt per octave. Send the oscillator to a mixer and mix in the output of the LFO. I like the LFO on channel 2, because the triangle shape through the folder sounds best. And remember, only channel 1 comes with a level control. Then send the sum output into the folder. The internal connection from folder to filter finishes the patch. Let's add a sequencer to this patch as well. Send the sequencer's gate output to the gate input of the envelope. And in this case, send the 1 volt per octave signal to the onboard multiple. So you have 2 copies that can be sent to both the oscillator and LFO rate. So both stay in tune. You can add complexity by using the internal modulation routing to add audio rate modulation from the LFO to the oscillator's pulse width and filter. So the LFO is very capable of audio rates, besides using it as an oscillator that makes it very suitable for frequency modulation as well. Because of the internal normalizations, no patch cables are needed for this. But if you want to create a ratio between oscillator and the modulating LFO that stays the same when playing melodic parts, LFO tracking is important. Again, you can use the multiple and the sequencer to keep both in tune. interested in textured percussive sounds, adding modulation from the envelope to control the speed of the LFO can lead to great results, especially when the envelope is used with a fast attack and longer decay. Again, experiment with LFO modulation to different destinations using the internal connections. Let's bring back the sample and hold circuit and have a closer look. There are obvious patching possibilities here because there are no internal connections from the sample and hold output. A simple idea is to send the sample and hold to an attenuator and use a subtle amount to modulate the filter cutoff. But it's a good idea to use the multiple of Mavis and send the sample and hold signal there, so you can use the signal on two destinations. For example, again, send one copy to an attenuator and the filter cutoff, and use another copy to modulate the pulse width of the oscillator. This adds nice rhythmic variations. If you're interested in atonal, ambient and sound structures, instead of modulating the filter, experiment with sending the sample and hold to modulate the pitch of the oscillator. Remember that the rate of the sample and hold is determined by the speed of the LFO. So you can take the envelope and send it to the first channel of the mixer used as an attenuator and then the LFO rate. This way you can control and change the sample and hold speed over time. The patch bay of Mavis allows you to patch outside of the box. For example, a trick with sample and hold I showed in some of my modular videos is to use it as an analog bit crusher. For this, use the output of the VCA and patch it back into the sample and hold. Then use the sample and hold output as the main output of Mavis. In order to get clean sounds, the sample and hold rate needs to be as fast as possible. So it's worth it to patch the oscillator into the sample and hold rate and use the LFO as oscillator by patching it into the fold input. Again, I used a sequencer in this patch. Although Mavis sounds pretty fat already, another audio routing example that is possible with the onboard utilities is a feedback patch. For this, send the oscillator to the mixer and the output of the mixer to the folder. Then send the output of the VCA to the multiple. Send one copy back to the mixer and mix it with the audio going to the folder and filter. And use the other copy as the main output of Mavis. I often advise people who are interested in modular to start with a semi-modular synth. I did the same. The advantage is that you don't have to spend a lot of money collecting a basic synth voice. Instead, you can spend your money on more creative additions. Here's an example using just a single module based on my personal love for complex modulation. It's the Erica Synth Black Joystick 2. What makes this fun is that it has 4 channels, each with 2 outputs, and each of those channels can be sample and hold, noise, sine wave modulation, or of course an XY joystick output. On top of that, you can record 8 seconds of joystick motion. In combination with the powerful synth voice and utilities incorporated in Mavis, this offers a lot of options. For example, let's use one channel as a noise source and use the mixer of Mavis to blend that in with the oscillator before going into the folder. To get some dynamic control, one channel is used as a joystick with the X output modulating the LFO rate and the Y output the filter cutoff. You can also expand on the patch where the oscillator and LFO are mixed and sent through the folder to create a dual oscillator voice. But now there are more modulation sources to add motion to this patch. A few seconds of recorded subtle wobbling motion I will file under random voltage is used to modulate the filter cutoff. Then a sine wave LFO going up and down in speed a bit is sent to modulate the pulse width of the oscillator. Note that I don't send the keyboard CV to the LFO for this patch, so it stays at a constant tone. And remember to experiment with the keyboard scale. Let's make a variation of this patch by adding a sequencer again, and this time use the multiple to tune both the oscillator and LFO. Another audio rate sine wave modulation to the VCA is added for some metallic crunches. The amount of this LFO is controlled with the joystick. Another aspect that opens up more modulation is the sample and hold circuit. In this patch, a sine wave LFO is used as the input of the sample and hold, and another slow LFO is triggering it. The result is sent to the attenuator to control the amount. Then the second input of the mixer in order to modulate the LFO rate. The LFO is set to high frequencies, creating interesting modulation via the internal connections. Another slow LFO is sent into the first input of the mixer to add more depth to the sample and hold signal. Finally, a random voltage is modulating the filter cutoff. Here, I expanded the setup with a few more modules. A digital module that, among many things, can be used as oscillator and quantizer. A utility module that adds more mixing and attenuation power. A dual VCA to modulate modulation. And a clever voltage generator that, among other things, can be used as a voltage-controlled envelope and modulation source. To be fair, this starts to add up in value, but it's more to show how Mavis can remain the center of a growing modular setup. For example, we can now patch a classic 3 oscillator synth voice with noise, with 2 envelopes and plenty of modulation. To achieve this, the external mixer is used to mix the oscillator and LFO of Mavis with a third oscillator and external noise source. That mix is sent to the fold input. The keyboard CV is sent to the multiple and used to tune the main oscillator, LFO and third oscillator. The internal connection between Mavis envelope and the VCA is used for the volume, but a second looping envelope is sent through an attenuator and then on to modulate the filter. For added dynamics, a slow sine wave LFO is modulating the decay of the second envelope. But to be honest, the oscillator and LFO through the folder on Mavis offer enough sounds in most cases. Here, that setup is expanded with an attack decay envelope, with its decay modulated with a smooth random voltage. That signal is sent to a mixer, mixed with a sine wave LFO, and sent to modulate the filter cutoff. Another slow LFO is sent through an attenuator and modulating the pulse width. The whole setup is sequenced again, like we did plenty of times before. Adding features also gives you the possibility to push Mavis beyond the basic synth voice and enter a world of drones and self-playing patches. Here's just one example. In this setup, a quantizer is used to create melodies. A slow sine wave is used as its input and a sample and hold signal is used to trigger it, generating new notes. The quantized signal is sent to the 1 volt per octave input of the oscillator. The output of the main oscillator is sent to a mixer and then the fold input. To create more complex tones, a steady sine wave oscillator is sent to a VCA and then mixed in with the main oscillator. The LFO of Mavis is opening and closing that VCA. Another slow LFO is sent to an attenuator and then on to modulate the LFO rate. And finally, a looping envelope is mixed with a slow LFO and modulating the filter cutoff. The attack and decay of the envelope are also modulated with another LFO. Of course, with a few modules like these, the possibilities grow exponentially. This is just a starting point. If you'd like to dive deeper in modular patch ideas, you can browse through my videos in any of these playlists. Also, smash that like, subscribe and bell button if you want to see more modular content from me. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching and see you next time.